Hi everyone. I am here to tell you about an intervention that we designed to promote the mind diet at midlife using the COM-B model and a randomized control feasibility study. And this is based on the work of Deirdre Timlin. So why do we need to think about or consider brain health? Well, it was estimated that there'll be 57 million people back in 2021 living with dementia globally, according to the World Health Organization. And this is predicted to increase by 10 million people each year due to most populations living longer, and then they're at an increased risk of developing dementia as we get older. It's one of the most leading causes of death, disability and dependency in most developed societies today. We know that currently there's no cure for dementia, so we really need to be looking at modifiable risk factors, such as consuming a healthy diet in order to delay the onset or to prevent entirely people going on to develop dementia. And we know that from those studies that have been done that if people consume a healthy diet over a long period of time, that they do have a reduced risk of dementia in later life. So we need to think about interventions, and we need to be thinking about starting those interventions at an earlier stage, because once someone has developed the early signs of neurodegeneration or disease, it's really too late by that point. So we need to be thinking about intervening at an earlier stage with lifestyle factors. So what is the MIND diet? Well, MIND stands for the Mediterranean Dash Diet Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. So you can understand why it's called the MIND diet, because it is quite a mouthful to get out. It is an American diet, and they have done a number of studies, and they found some very promising results with this diet. They thought that it could delay the onset of dementia by up to about 4 years. So a really interesting diet to have a look at. It's a hybrid of the DASH and the Mediterranean diet. It's designed really to promote brain health because it includes foods that are rich in vitamins, carotenoids and flavonoids, which may protect the brain by reducing oxidative stress and inflammation. The MIND diet focuses on dietary components and servings that have been linked in the research and have been suggested to be neuroprotective and can prevent dementia. So what is it, and what do you need to do if you're trying to consume the MIND diet? Well, it includes things like eating leafy greens every day, or at least another portion of other vegetables per day. Nuts every day, now that's raw nuts, not processed ones. Berries at least twice a week, beans every other day, whole grains, there's a recommendation for 3 portions per day, fish at least once a week, poultry at least twice a week, olive oil as the main oil for cooking or using on top of salads and things like that. And also as part of this diet, 1 glass of red wine per day. Now it's a small glass, about 150 mils. And then also as part of the diet, we're recommended to limit certain foods such as red meats, butter and stick margarine. You can see there less than 1 tablespoon per day, cheese less than 1 serving per week, limit pastries and sweets, and also then, reduce fried or fast food down to 1 serving per week. So quite a lot of information there in relation to the MIND diet. So when we started to design this intervention, we used the behaviour change wheel. Most people will probably know the COM-B model. It's quite a famous model, very well publicised, and it's really at the heart of the behaviour change wheel. And you may or may not be able to see on the slide here because of the camera, but you can see the green part at the heart of this little wheel to the right-hand side of the screen. And this is the COM-B. There's 3 stages to designing an intervention using the behaviour change wheel. And I have sort of outlined the 3 stages on this slide, but I'm going to talk about each stage in a little bit more detail now. So stage 1, understanding the uptake of the mind diet. Okay, so our preliminary work in order to design this intervention really included a systematic review looking at how theories of behaviour change have been used previously to design nutritional interventions, and to what extent the theories translated over into components of the intervention. And we also did a qualitative piece where we included elements of the COM-B and the theoretical domains framework, because the theoretical domains allow us to sort of look at the behaviour in a little bit more detail. So it allowed us really to look at facilitators and barriers to the uptake of the mind diet. And you can see here on the slide that this links directly with capabilities, motivation and opportunity. So in relation to capabilities, you can divide capabilities into physical capabilities or psychological capabilities. Physical capabilities are the actual skills required to adhere to the mind diet. So it might be, cooking, following a recipe, being able to include all of the ingredients. Psychological capability includes sort of knowledge, nutritional knowledge and understanding of what's required. Would be a good example of that. When it comes to motivation, it can be reflective or automatic. So reflective motivation is where you are intentionally planning to engage with a particular behaviour. So you're setting yourself goals. You're going to eat leafy greens every day, or you're going to avoid unhealthy snacks. And automatic then includes things like, how it makes us feel emotionally, do we feel better as a result of it, and what sort of reinforcement is associated with it. Opportunity is really related to physical opportunities and social opportunities. So physical opportunities involve, the environment and our resources in some capacity or other. So if you wanted to follow the mind diet, you'd have to be sure that you had lots of fresh fruit and vegetables in the cupboards, that you were, you were meal planning for the week so that you would know that you would be adhering to the diet. So you might have to change the types of groceries maybe that you buy on a weekly basis, for instance. That would be a good example of environmental changes. The social influences, when it comes to diet, very often we are cooking for a household, or we're cooking as part of a household. So thinking about what the social influences might be and who your supporters might be, and getting everybody sort of involved from the outset in relation to this nutritional intervention. So once we had identified the theoretical domains, or the facilitators and the barriers that were important for the mind diet at midlife, you can see here that the theoretical domains are the yellow circle within the behaviour change wheel. You can see the COM-B a little bit better in this slide at the very heart. If you look at the red circle, that is our intervention functions. So from our research, we identified 6 out of the 9 intervention functions as being important for promotion of the mind diet. So education was one, so improving knowledge and understanding about what the mind diet is and how we can follow it and what we can do in order to create it from a participant perspective. Training, which was involved imparting skills, so maybe teaching some basic recipes where we can include lots of vegetables and things like that into our diet, or being creative about cooking fish, which might not be something that everyone consumes regularly. Persuasion includes things like influencing attitudes in order to influence behaviour and action. Modelling, so using examples to inspire participants, helping them to maybe support and encourage each other as well through the process in some of our groups, not in all of our intervention, but in some of the intervention groups, and we'll be talking about that in a little minute. We talked a little bit about environmental restructuring, so thinking about what we're buying, what we're going to be cooking, what we're going to need in order to follow the diet, and then sort of enablement, thinking about things like, following a diet which is rich in fruit and veg can be very expensive. Buying fresh meat can be very expensive. So thinking maybe about alternatives like frozen fruit or frozen veg or tinned varieties in order to maybe reduce or cut down the price. So we have identified our intervention functions, and the next stage then is really to think about behaviour change techniques that link to those intervention functions, or that link to the theoretical domains, those things that are facilitating or those things that are acting as barriers. in order to be able to design our intervention. And you can see on this slide, I'm not going to go into them in too much detail, but we have actually linked behaviour change techniques directly on to things like capabilities, opportunity and motivation. So, you know, it's promoting knowledge, it's promoting self-monitoring, it's promoting that peer support and that action planning and being ready to adhere to the MIND diet. So then that takes us to the intervention itself and what the content of that's going to be and how we're going to implement it. So you need to consider all of those things. So really this was a feasibility study. You know, could we do this research? Was this something that would be acceptable to people, adults at midlife? So the aim of this research was really to determine the feasibility and acceptability of a 12-week behaviour change wheel, theory-driven intervention encouraging the uptake of the MIND diet in midlife adults aged 40 to 55 years. These were community dwelling adults. They had no major sort of physical or mental health issues. And the objectives were to determine if promoting capability, opportunity and motivation would enhance adherence to a 12-week MIND diet intervention to this group. To compare the MIND diet uptake rates in two intervention groups, those receiving face-to-face and web-based support compared to those with no support. So basically in the no support group, they were given a MIND diet fact sheet only, and a control group who were told to follow a normal diet but were given some information on the Eat Well plate. To examine if adherence to the MIND diet over the 12-week intervention influenced nutritional intake and psychological well-being, and really to establish the acceptability of the intervention. So we did a very, very short process evaluation at the end with some of our participants. So this slide here is really just a reminder of what our methods were. Our design was a randomized controlled prospective follow-up study employing a 3x2 factorial design. So we had 3 intervention groups and 2 time points, baseline and 12-week follow-up. We had 41 participants aged 40 to 55 years. Just over half were female. And these participants were randomized into one of 3 groups. And we've already kind of mentioned these, but the MIND diet with support included a website with resources to support the MIND diet uptake. It had a chat room, it had messaging, and it was monitored by the researcher who was Deirdre Timlin. You know, she would have answered any queries, any problems that the participants had, and she would also have sort of sent them messages of encouragement on a weekly basis as well. MIND diet with no support then, the MIND diet information on what and how much to eat. Both of the intervention groups were given a MIND diet sheet. It was a daily sheet, a checklist basically. You know, so if they ate nuts that day, they ticked a box. If they ate chicken, they ticked a box. And both groups were given that to keep. And then the control group was asked to follow a normal diet, but they were given the Department of Health's information on the Eat Well plate as well, which sort of gives information about what we should be eating more of and what we should be eating less of. So we took a number of measures as well from baseline to follow-up. You know, as I've said, we had a MIND diet checklist. Now that was completed on a daily basis for the full 12 weeks of the intervention. And it was also validated using a food diary as what, you know, the information that we gleaned from the food diaries. So food diaries were taken for 7 days at baseline and 7 days at follow-up, and they were analysed using a nutrition package called Nutritics. We also measured capability, opportunity and motivation with an intervention specifically designed for this study, or a questionnaire, sorry, specifically designed for this study. We looked at various aspects of cognition, attention, working memory, and sort of visual information processing using Cantab Connect, because Cantab Connect is particularly sensitive to changes with age, changes with diet as well, and changes with sort of neurodegeneration. We looked at mood using the positive and negative affect schedules. These were taken for 4 consecutive days, 4 times a day, 2 weekdays and 2 weekend days. And we also measured quality of life using the World Health Organization's brief quality of life scale. So our results suggested using a repeated measures ANOVA, it showed that in comparison to the control group, both intervention groups significantly improved on all COM-B components at follow-up. Positive mood also improved across the intervention, as did quality of life. Mind diet scores improved as well, which meant our participants were adhering to the Mind diet throughout the 12 weeks. And we also found a general improvement in nutritional intake as a result of that across the 12-week intervention. There was no change in cognitive function across the 12 weeks. So what does this mean? This is the first pilot RCT to test the effectiveness of the Mind diet on cognitive function, mood and quality of life, and to assess the usefulness of the COM-B model in increasing adherence to the Mind diet. It was also the first RCT to use the behaviour change wheel model to design and deliver a dietary intervention using a whole dietary pattern. Very often theories of behaviour change will look at very clearly defined behaviours. When you look at something as complex as the Mind diet, it has about 15 different components or 15 different behaviours and messages. So it's about breaking those 15 components down into very easy messages that participants can look at and understand, have I done this today? Have I not done this today? So we were able to do this with the Mind diet in this intervention. What we found was that moderate adherence to the Mind diet improved positive mood, quality of life and nutritional dietary intake in this sample. Assessing cognitive function at midlife, we were really very unlikely to see any major changes in cognition over the 12 weeks. So we wouldn't really have expected to see any major changes. You know, cognition declines moderately from about the age of sort of late 20s, early 30s onwards. And you don't really see any marked declines until, you get into maybe your late or your, maybe 70s. You tend to sort of see a decline beyond that. But that decline is not significant enough to make a difference on a daily basis. You can just see it sometimes with the CANTAB scores. But certainly in relation to if there was neurodegeneration there, you would see quite marked declines, but we didn't really expect to see that. Future interventions need to use larger samples and we need to have longer durations of interventions to really establish if the Mind diet can delay cognitive decline in later life. And the other part of that is we need to know what the optimal age is to intervene and adopt the Mind diet to achieve that sort of delay in cognitive decline. Is it a lifespan approach, or can we, adopt the Mind diet from our 30s onwards, and will it have any beneficial effects? What we learnt from the evaluation of the intervention was that it recommended that we use fewer manageable behaviour change techniques. I think we had about 25 different behaviour change techniques across our intervention groups, which really is too many. A couple is hard to manage on an intervention, never mind 25. And what we found was that our participants tended to use more of things like goal setting, self-monitoring and education on the diet. So setting clear dietary targets as an effective strategy for promoting adherence to the Mind diet. So I would just like to say thank you for listening, and if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. This final slide, it just has our research team, so Deirdre at the top, Maeve, Laura and Jacqueline at the bottom there, and these are our papers that we have published so far based on our research on the Mind diet, if anyone is interested and wants to have a closer look at those. Thank you.